I want to tell you a story, not because it's extraordinary, but because it changed everything for me. And I've been thinking a lot about how I want to tell the story. So let me start here. I didn't leave my home country because life was easy. I left because staying felt heavier than going. Home wasn't really a place of calm for me. I mean, don't get me wrong, there was love, yes, but also a lot of chaos, confusion, and pain I didn't know how to carry it. Growing up around addiction changes you. Not loudly, and not all at once, but slowly. It teaches you to read moods, to adapt, and to survive long before you understand yourself. And honestly, at school, things weren't simple either. There were situations that shook my trust in people, in the system, and honestly in myself. There were moments where I felt misunderstood, exposed, and completely alone with things I couldn't name yet. For a long time, I didn't have any answers at all. There was only this quiet voice inside of me that said if I would stay here, I would slowly disappear. So leaving wasn't rebellion, and it wasn't running away. It was the first honest decision I made for myself. So I didn't went to New Zealand to find freedom. I went there because I wanted to figure out who I am when I was not shaped by survival anymore. So I tried to make it as simple as possible. I saved up some money, around $1,500 for the flight, $1,500 for, well, everything else over there. And I had no big plan, no safety net. And when I sat on that plane, somewhere halfway across the world, it just hit me. I'm really far away now. If something happens, there's no easy way back. So whatever comes next, I had to face completely on my own. And that was my first step. One of the most memorable nights of my life started very simple. I had just arrived in Bahia, checked into a hostel, dropped my backpack on the bed, and walked outside to smoke a cigarette. A guy stood next to me. He told me his name was Zach, and we started talking. Where are you from? How long are you staying? The usual backpacker stuff. And nothing about that felt special in that moment. And that's exactly why it was. A few hours later, we were sitting with a group from the hostel near the beach. Someone had a speaker, someone had beers, and without really planning it, the group just kept growing. We decided that we wanted to go out together that night. So we found a little karaoke bar, and it was Saturday night, so we expected the bar to be completely packed. After we entered into the bar, there were only 2 people in the corner playing chess and 1 guy at the bar hitting some shots. So we just did what felt right. We went to the barkeeper, ordered some shots for ourselves, asked him for the cheesiest Elton John song he had, and we just started singing. And not because we were very good at it. Believe me, it was horrible to listen to probably, but we just didn't care. And slowly something shifted. People started coming in, locals, Maoris, and at first they watched us, then they laughed, and then they joined in. Within an hour, that empty bar turned into this loud and chaotic mix of strangers sitting together, arms around each other, completely present. The energy was super high and the vibe was, well, simply perfect. And usually this is the moment when you are actually staying. You know, when everything feels great, you don't want to go. But something inside of me started to whisper. It wasn't loud, it wasn't logical. It was just this quiet, clear instinct that said, go now. So I looked at Zach and I told him, man, let's move. Let's go to the beach. Let's watch some shooting stars and see what happens. And honestly, he could have questioned it. He could have said, man, the vibe here is perfect. Why should we go? But he didn't. He trusted the moment, and luckily he trusted me. He smiled and said, if you feel it, brother, I'm in. Let's make it a buddy night. So we walked away from the music, from the noise, and from the crowd, and headed towards the ocean. So Zach and me were laying at the beach under a sky full of stars, until we realized a group of people. They were probably mid-20s, and they were drinking wine from a carton. So I asked them, what are you guys doing? And they said, well, we're playing a funny drinking game. So they explained us the drinking game, and We joined in, we started to talk and to laugh and to tell us the usual backpacker stuff, but it was very easy. It was not like someone tried to impress one another. It was just very calm and open and just beautiful. So after a while I was asking them, what exactly are you doing here in New Zealand? One of them looked at me and said they were sailing to Fiji on a pirate ship. So I started to laugh because obviously I thought he was joking. But then he casually pointed out in the fog and said, it's out there somewhere. A red three-masted ship. Honestly, I couldn't see anything, just darkness and mist. And then he asked me, like, do you guys want to join? And I remember this moment very clearly because I was running thoughts through my mind and I was like, well, here I am with my new best friend I know since probably 4 hours, a group of new friends. We know each other since maybe half an hour. And actually my phone was dead, no one knew where I was, and it kind of felt like a moment where you can either die in that night or it will become one of the nights you will remember for the rest of your life. So after thinking for a while, I just said yes. So we got into a small rowing boat and started moving into the fog. No one spoke a word. You could only hear the water and the paddles. Honestly, for a few minutes it became very unsettling because there was no noise and the shore was disappearing inside the fog. And I was thinking about, like, man, did we make the right decision? But then out of nowhere, it appeared. A massive red silhouette rising slowly out of the fog. Quiet, heavy, and super unreal. They threw down a rope ladder, so we climbed up. And suddenly we were standing on the deck of a red pirate ship in the middle of the ocean, getting greeted by some backpackers who thought we would be the new crew members, like it was the most normal thing in the world. We spent the entire night there, talking, laughing, drinking wine, exploring the ship. Everyone was sharing stories about where they came from and where they were heading next. At some point of the night, I decided I wanted to climb up the middle mast, the highest one of them. So a Brazilian guy and me, we grabbed a bottle of wine and we climbed up to the very top. It was maybe 15, 18 meters above the deck. And we were just drinking, smoking, laughing, talking, and luckily even watching some shooting stars. Then slowly the sky began to change. The stars faded, the horizon grew brighter, and the night turned into sunrise. Sitting there, watching the world wake up, I understood something I had never really felt before. Life doesn't open up when you wait until it's safe. It opens up when you trust your instinct, and you take the step before you know where it leads. Honestly, that night didn't make my life perfect, but it definitely changed how I moved through it for the rest of my life. After the night on the pirate ship, I traveled for a few more months. And I realized traveling can also be the opposite of light. To give you a little bit more context, I wasn't very good with money back then. Not because I didn't care, but because no one taught me actually how to be responsible with it. And, well, let's just say I had to learn my lesson. Usually I used to live in the moment, trusted that things would somehow work out, and honestly for a long time they did. Until they didn't. One day I realized that there was no money left in my account, so I literally couldn't pay for any food, nor for any place to sleep. So for a few days I slept on park benches and drank water from public bathrooms to survive. I wasn't angry or dramatic, but quiet, because I thought, how can I solve the situation now? After my third night being homeless, on one of the benches I slept on, an older man sat next to me, and he told me his name was Greg. He didn't come in with big questions or big advice. He just started talking to me like I was a normal person and not a problem that needed fixing. At some point I told him my story. He listened without interrupting, without judging, or without trying to be smarter than the situation. And after a while he told me about his life, about the farm he lived on, out in nature, about how there were always something to repair, something to build, something that, well, needed hands and time. And then he said something that for me actually saved my life in that moment. He said I could come with him to his farm. I could stay there, eat with him and work with him. That he could use some help, and he said I could maybe use some structure. I didn't think long about it actually. I said yes, and was very, very grateful. And honestly, living with Greg changed the rhythm of my life. We worked almost every day, not rushed or forced, but always with intention. He showed me how to work properly, how to handle machines, how to approach physical work with respect instead of force. He taught me how to drive a quad on his farm, how to use heavy equipment, and how to show up even when no one's watching. Honestly, without ever trying to be one, he became an amazing father figure for me. And I can remember one special night when he invited a lot of his neighbors into his garden on his farm. We made a big bonfire, and kids were running around, people sitting together, sharing food we cooked under a smoking stone, laughing, talking about life. Moments that felt actually normal for them, but completely new to me. And that night I also got my Maori branding, because there was an older Maori and he was tattooed from head to toe. And there was a moment in that night where he stopped talking and he stared at me for a while. It was a little bit unsettling, to be fair. Then he pointed at me into the moon and back to me and said Marama. And that became my Maori nickname. In that moment, I didn't feel like a visitor anymore. I felt accepted into something bigger than myself. When I eventually left the farm, it didn't feel like a goodbye. It felt like a pause. When I left, I already imagined coming back again, sitting there with Greg in his farm and telling him all the beautiful stories and adventures I hadn't lived yet. After that wonderful experience, two of my best friends, Bjana and Eike, visit me from Germany. And suddenly that journey wasn't just mine anymore. We rented a small Toyota Corolla, and sometimes we slept in the car, slept in hostels, or sometimes we camped wherever the road stopped making sense. We had no strict plan, we had just had maps, bad decisions, and the feeling that we were exactly where we were supposed to be. We crossed the South Island together, with long drives, loud music, and long stretches of silence when the landscape said more than we ever could. Mountains rising out of nowhere, lakes appearing after endless curves, roads that felt like they might never end. And honestly, some nights we camped in places that didn't feel real. At Moriaki Boulders, we watched the sun come up over stones that had been there for millions of years. No words, just cold air, coffee, and the ocean breeze. In Wanaka, we pushed ourselves up a mountain on bikes, exhausted before the ride even started. Laughing, crashing more often than we wanted to admit, and always trying again. Somewhere along the way, Kai joined us, a friend I had met earlier in Wellington, and is still a brother till this day for me, who somehow became part of the journey without effort. From that point on, it felt even more complete. We drove all the way to the southern edge of the country, standing on cliffs, looking out into nothing but wind and water, as far south as the road would take us. We stayed in places where strangers became friends in a single night. Shared kitchens, shared stories, wild nights in Queenstown that blurred into early mornings. Days where we were completely unprepared, like the time we went kayaking for hours, followed by a long hike back with no food at all and just one small bottle of water for at least 12 hours. Just stubbornness and the hope that it would somehow work out. And most of the time it actually did. One special adventure stuck with me. We were just camping in Milford Sound, one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. And while we were down at the information center, I saw two girls, and they were close to tears. So I asked the girls what was the problem, and they said, well, we have a flat tire, we're stranded here, we cannot leave, can you help us? I said, yeah, sure, of course, no worries, show us the camper van. So the girls were leading the way, and my friend Ike asked me, do you know how to switch a tire? I said, no, you? He said, no. I said, well, then we have a funny challenge ahead of us. So we arrived at the camper van, and they showed us where the tire was, right under the bed, and it was fixed with some tools. So we tried to move a couple of things without breaking them and trying not to look completely useless, until I spotted a guy who looked like some kind of mechanic. I went to him and asked him, hey, can you help us? Like, we need to switch a tire and you look like you know what to do. He said, yeah, of course. So he grabbed his toolbox, he went to the camper van, built off the bed, grabbed the tire, switched the tire within a couple of minutes and showed us move for move how it's done. The girls super happy and said, well, thank you so much. You saved our lives. They were happy. They were just like driving off into the horizon, and the mechanic also said goodbye and said like, hey man, maybe you learned like a skill you might need one day in your life. And we were laughing like we never switched a tire before. So how big is the chance that we might need the skill in the near future? How wrong we could have been. Literally 2 days later, we were driving toward Abel Tasman, a beautiful national park, and one of my other friends, Bjarne, took a corner a little bit too fast. We heard some kind of crash, and for a moment it felt like the car might slide right off the bridge, but nothing serious happened. But when we stopped, one of the tires was completely destroyed. This time, none of us panicked, because we know what to do. So we grabbed the tools and changed the tire in minutes. Super calm, focused, almost automatic. Standing there at the side of the road, I felt this quiet realization settling in. Life actually teaches you exactly what you need, but only after you moved, and never before. Those weeks weren't made of one big adventure. They were made of many small, beautiful moments. Waking up early and watching the fog lift off a lake without saying a word. Sharing cheap food in parking lots, laughing about nothing. Sunsets we didn't film properly. Conversations we never finished. And silence that felt full instead of empty. Somewhere in between all of those beautiful moments, I kept thinking about going back. Back to Greg's farm, drinking tea with him and telling him about all the amazing adventures and stories I've experienced since the moment I left his farm. And in my head, that conversation already existed. When I started heading back, everything felt normal. Until I got the message. Greg was alone on his farm. There had been an accident. And he didn't survive. For a long moment, I was just staring at my phone. All the stories I wanted to tell him suddenly had nowhere to go. For the first time in a long while, I didn't try to understand anything. I didn't look for meaning or was searching for a lesson. I just felt his absence. It took time to accept that some chapters don't get a proper ending. Not every connection comes with closure. But that doesn't make them meaningless. Greg didn't come into my life to hear the stories of my adventures. He came into my life to change the way how I walk through them. Some people don't stay. They just show up exactly when you need them the most. And then they leave again. Quietly. Without any explanation. And even though I never got to tell him everything I had lived after the farm, he's part of every step that followed. And that's when I understood what this journey had really been about. The first step doesn't protect you from loss. It doesn't promise you happy endings. And it definitely doesn't give you control. But what it gives you is something else. It gives you a life that actually happens. Real connections, real experiences, real love, and yes, real pain. But all of this is better than standing still. Because staying safe would have meant that I never met Greg, that I'd never met one of my best friends, Kai, and that I never met the first big love of my life. So trust me when I say, to take the first step is the greatest gift you can give to yourself. Not because it makes life easier, but because it's the only way to feel alive. And that, my friend, was my first step.